Thank you, Speaker. On behalf of the Greens, I rise to speak in support of the Strata Legislation Amendment Bill 2023, a bill which makes a number of sensible amendments, many of which emerged from the 2021 statutory review of the Strata Schemes Development Act 2015 and the Strata Schemes Management Act 2015. This review consulted with stakeholders, residents and the broader community to understand how strata schemes are currently working in practice and identify areas for improvement, and made no less than 139 recommendations. It is astounding that 2 years after the review reported that this is the first piece of legislation acting on any of these recommendations, and I acknowledge the work of the Minister and of the Government in bringing these recommendations, this legislation forward. The Greens welcome the long overdue and much needed reforms proposed by this bill, which we understand are the first in a broad suite of changes the government plans to make in relation to enacting the statutory review's recommendations. And it's very clear, and I recall recently, after being a recently elected Member of Parliament in 2015, the very, very intense and heightened debate that occurred around the review of the strata laws and the stages that were put in place, the changes that were put in place then, and recognise the government's decision and acknowledge the government's decision to take these reforms in stages so that there is time and space for people to be able to engage and be consulted about these changes. Right now, we know as growing numbers of people move into apartments and buildings are higher and higher in density, and that is continuing to be posited as a solution to the housing crisis, we need to recognise that strata schemes need to be able to be gotten right. The various measures within this bill are sensible and non-controversial steps towards achieving this goal, and the Greens absolutely support them. In particular, we support the bill's amendment of the provisions in the Strata Schemes Development Act pertaining to the collective sales and strata scheme renewals. In 2015, the Greens opposed changes to this act by the then coalition government that allowed for the collective sale or redevelopment of a strata lot with the support of only 75% of owners. Previously, collective sales and redevelopment required unanimous owner consent. Back then, we warned, and many people expressed serious concern at the lowering of the threshold of support from 100% to 75% would cause significant uncertainty and insecurity for people living in strata schemes, and allow for developers to make money off the detriment of people wishing to be secure in their own homes. While we have not seen this borne out on a massive scale, we must recognise that since the introduction of the 75% threshold, dodgy developers and other bad faith actors have used the reduced threshold to achieve their own ends. In one very well-publicised case in Macquarie Park, a developer used different company names to purchase units into neighbouring buildings that were part of the same strata scheme. Although 40 of the 45 owners agreed to sell, the developer, Highcorp, was in the minority dissenting. Highcorp made a bid on the buildings and then withdrew it, leaving the owners to go with another bidder who later walked away after Highcorp mounted an expensive legal challenge to the sale. The owners were left with a huge bill from the challenge and little chance of redeveloping their buildings. We have also heard significant stories of the personal stress that the changes to these 75% laws made to elderly people who had done significant renovations to their homes in strata schemes, to then live in fear that they would be in a situation where their home, their place that they had created for themselves to be their home, would be sold from underneath them as a result of a 75% change. Stories like this are the greatest reason why we need increased transparency and in the process of collective sales, and why the Greens strongly support this bill's proposal to increase the disclosure requirements of conflicts of interest of members of strata committees. I turn now to the other significant component of the bill, which is the introduction of new protections for assistants and companion animals. Australia has some of the highest rates of pet ownership in the world, and pets are a beloved part of every household in freestanding homes and apartments alike. For owners and for renters, pets are a key part of people's families, and it's critical that the laws that we make in this place facilitate people to be able to live with their four-legged friends and their pets in their homes without others trying to intervene and control what is acceptable when it comes to people being able to live with pets. The Greens believe that the right to have a pet is one that should be enjoyed equally by owner-occupiers and renters. In fact, when it comes to all of the strata laws reforms, it is absolutely critical as we move into the next stage of the review and as we're looking at further reviews to the strata laws, that there is always equity when it comes to information shared, when it comes to participation in decisions in the building between strata owners and people who are renting in stratas. Renters often make up a significant proportion of strata schemes, and it's absolutely critical that renters are included in the discussions that impact and the information that is shared that impact on their lives. When we get back to pets, though, it is absolutely our view that any reasons for refusing pets should be limited to existing laws. And I'll share a story of when I attempted to move this change to allow renters to have pets in their homes under the previous government when we were reviewing the Residential Tenancies Act. And I remember having a conversation with Parliamentary Council, and I said, I'd like to move an amendment that would allow renters to be able to have pets in their homes, like owners can have pets in their homes. And they said, but what kind of pets? And they were trying to get me to put a limit on what kind of pet would be okay. And I said, I'm not going to limit that. I said, there are other laws that exist. And they said, well, you surely don't think that a renter can have a horse in an apartment if they're renting. And I said, well, if the owner can have a horse in an apartment, then the renter should be able to have the horse in the apartment. The principle is that there should be other laws in the state to prevent the holding of inappropriate animals inside apartment buildings, and we shouldn't be making a distinction as to whether you rent, whether you live in a strata scheme, or whether you own and you live in a freestanding property as to what is the appropriate thing. It should be decided based on the welfare of the animal and the appropriateness of the situation of having that animal in a domestic setting. This bill would make it so that any strata bylaw prohibiting companion and assistant animals has no force or effect to the extent that it would unreasonably prohibit the keeping of an animal on a lot within a strata scheme. This change would also extend to bylaws that restrict or unreasonably burden the keeping of an assistance animal, and that is a change that the Greens absolutely welcome with open arms. We also support a raft of other changes in the bill to make strata law make changes to strata law, including amendments related to governance, requiring new tenants to be provided with all necessary bylaws, and allowing the regulator to compulsorily appoint a strata managing agent if the owner's corporation is not satisfied with their existing agent's functions. Each of these measures will have real and practical impacts for the lives of thousands of people across our community who live in strata schemes, and we look forward to seeing the next steps in the new year with further strengthening of the laws in this state when it comes to people living in strata schemes. I commend the bill to the House.